welcome back. My name is Suzanne. I specialize in evolutionary astrology, horary astrology, and human design. If you want to find out more about my work, you can go to gohigherfrequency.com. Today, I'm going to be focusing on the upcoming eclipses, but through the lens of the Aries ingress, which we're already feeling pretty intensely. And what I call this eclipse season is the Fool. The new moon in Pisces on February 27th was the moon that kicked off this eclipse season. So if you want to go back to my new moon video, I walk you through all of the new moons from January until now. It's very helpful to understand the movement and where we're at so you can understand where we're headed. In this new moon video, I talked about how we really need to be careful about what we wish for, because if we're not clear in understanding our values as a country or even individually, we can herald in a quickening of a future we didn't necessarily want, because life is not perfectly orchestrated to our grand plans, our anticipation, our imagining of what is possible. Sometimes we have these fanciful ideas, especially with Neptune in the last few degrees of Pisces. We have these grand plans of how everything's going to be a certain way. And then when we get there, it's not exactly what we envisioned. And that's why manifestation can be kind of dangerous if you're not really clear about how it works. Because you can ask for something and you can envision something, but if your subconscious mind isn't aligned, if you aren't aligned with your values, it can be a complete surprise what shows up. Now, I've had this happen a couple of times in my life, and usually it happens for the best, but I'm surely surprised with the actual event that happens, and sometimes disappointed because I wasn't very clear about all of the things I wanted included in that package. Now, are we always able to manifest exactly what we want? I don't think so. I think it depends on our journey and what we're here to do. But one thing is clear. We are all entering a new cycle. We cannot escape that part. It might not be what we've personally envisioned for our future, especially in the things out of our control, like the country. And the country definitely impacts us all individually. So there's some kind of overarching theme that we have to figure out how to adjust to that is out of our control, because we're not all walking toward the same path in evolutionary terms and in our hopes and wishes or our dreams of what we want to manifest for the future. Everything works in an orchestration, and sometimes it's not going in the direction we want it to go, and that can be incredibly frustrating. I want to be very honest and clear that we're headed towards some very rocky times. It's always rocky when there's change involved, but this is going to be extra rocky. So I think everybody should get their body very healthy right now, their mind very healthy as much as they can, so that once the broader changes start happening, you'll have some practice in that. I have been preparing for this time period for a very long time. I didn't know that that's what I was doing, but that's how my life works with Neptune on my North Node. I stumble along and then I get later down the path and I'm like, oh, that's what I have been doing this whole time. I quit drinking 6 months before the pandemic hit. It was divine timing, because I'm not sure where I'd be if I hadn't had that 6 months of sobriety before the pandemic, if I hadn't picked up a spiritual practice. And since then, I've really been working toward this exact moment. Let's talk about what we're all seeing. And I want to talk about it from my point of view and from the point of view of the Aries ingress. Now, this is what I call Trump season 2, the great dictator experiment. It's a very Aries tough guy persona that we're presenting to the world now. And we've been headed toward this direction with the nodes pointed toward Aries, or we've been preparing for this moment, but it's starting to get more and more intense and will get more and more intense as Neptune ingresses into Aries and then Saturn ingresses into Aries. I think with all of the Pisces energy we've been exposed to, especially as Saturn has joined Neptune in Pisces, there seems to be a collective need for a strong father figure, a tough love male authority, someone to make people feel like there are boundaries again, because we've been in this place of no boundaries and we don't know where life is headed. And a lot of us feel like we need to get things back under control. And when you're on that cycle of, I want to be free, I want to flow in the universe, it gets to be too much, then we swing to the opposite side. You know, it's like, no, I need to take control. I need to be very strict with my boundaries. I need to separate. That's all the evolutionary dichotomy of separation versus merging. In the womb versus I need to survive and I cannot rely on God to take care of me. I've got to do it myself. So people are really reacting to that, and they're wanting leaders that are going to be very strong. You know, it's the perfect time for holy wars and dictators with this movement toward the dominant yang energy. We've been living in a time of great receptivity with all of the water and earth. Even though I know some people haven't felt that way, it's really been more receptive in nature. And we'll go back to receptivity eventually when Pluto moves into Pisces. There'll be a big movement into receptivity and right orientedness and merging again. But for now, we're trying to get control. And so it's very yang, and we're going into a very yang time. So for the very sensitive among us, myself included, it's going to be rough because it's going to be a jolt that we're not used to in the environment around us. I mean, we're already feeling that, but it's going to even be more pronounced as Neptune and Saturn go into Aries, and then we have Uranus go into Gemini. It's going to be a big jolt into this yang place, which is going to be good. We're going to have a lot of ideas. We're going to have a lot of creativity, but it's going to lack receptivity and empathy and practicality, basically. How are we going to survive in this time of disaster, and how are we going to help others? There's going to be a lack of empathy and a lack of practicality that we're all going to have to contend with. But at the same time, there's going to be possibly some inventions that'll save us for some time. There might be some great creativity that comes out of this time, but it's going to be hard for those of us that take on all of the feelings of the world, because it's going to be survival of the fittest. We're going into that time. Now, some of these people who think they can't survive will be able to survive, and they'll be surprised by that. But it's going to be hard for the people that are empaths like me to really manage all of the collective pain and struggle and the loss of nature and the things that we're already feeling. It's not going to be a very comfortable place for us. We will need to find ways to rejuvenate our spirit and to take less of the world onto ourselves. So there is part of a protectionistic measure that we all need. And I think a lot of the people that are the listeners, the empaths, the people that are the astrologers, that are the counselors, that are the projectors are going to become more in demand. Now, whether we're going to be able to survive that, because I don't know that people are going to have a lot of money to be honest, to give people like us. It's going to be pretty slim out there. I don't know how we're going to survive, but we'll figure it out, I think. We'll figure out barter systems between us. There is hope at the end of the day. We will go through a period of hard adjustment, but we'll figure out how to adjust. So as much as you can prepare now for that time, simplify. Really simplify and think about how much you really need, and then how much can you share, because it's a reciprocal motion that I think a lot of the leaders today don't really get. They hoard, and there's no sympathy for the rest of us. We will have heroes that come out of this time. But right now, there is a frenzy feeling to go forward, because I think underneath there's a lot more of an emergency than we realize. We are in trouble. And I think people out there know this, that have dug underneath the surface, know this, but they're not telling us. And they're trying to grab it for themselves and take it from the majority, because we only have a certain amount. And they think that they can wield the power of that money toward something that will benefit them. That's basically what it is. But we're in this race to be first in AI, especially all the technologists pinning their hopes for this next growth spurt, because the growth has started to stagnate and our dominance, especially in the US, is in jeopardy. So there's this race to be first in AI, space travel. If the world is collapsing, where will we go? This race toward digital currency, the dollar, I think, is in jeopardy. There's some of them that really think we can save humanity with technology. They, in the US, want to save our dominance in the world, to take back our power, and to end this victim mentality that they feel that we mired into with all of the empathy, the liberal guilt, they call it. And I think a lot of the people that feel entitled, the people that wield all of the power, think that about us, that we are entitled when they're hoarding all of the resources. So it just really depends on your perspective. And so when I've been studying all of the things that I've been studying to lead myself into this moment, it's really about looking at multiple perspectives and zooming out so that I'm not identified with my perspective. It's very hard to empathize with multiple points of views and perspectives, but it's very helpful, because then I'm not blaming other people. I can listen and I can go, oh, I can understand where you're coming from here. And I don't think a lot of people have that capacity anymore to empathize with another point of view, to see from another person's frame of reference. That doesn't mean that we all agree with that frame of reference. We have a frame of reference, a bias. And some people think that their bias is what should lead the world. We're all trying to control each other at the end of the day. That's what we're doing. I think some parts of what's happening in the leadership to make people wake up that they're feeling entitled to something that they don't think we should be feeling entitled to, that the rest of the world isn't entitled to. There's a minority that controls the wealth, and they feel entitled to everything and think that we should not feel entitled, that we should work as hard as they are working. I think that's really how they feel. And we should get hungry enough that we'll work according to what they think we should work toward. So there's this feeling that they want to get rid of the parasitic elements of our society that have been draining them of energy to man up. It's like this toxic male energy manning up. And I'm not saying it's just male, it is female too. There are women who are attached to this idea of the daddy savior, and this idea that you've got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You got to man up, ain't be no sissy, because there's a lot of derogatory terms toward the receptive in us. I didn't get any coddling when I was a little girl. I sort of feel like that with the Pluto and Leo generation, because there's all these older women that I've befriended and they're complaining about the healthcare system because it is changing. But I'm like, oh my God, I've never gotten that treatment. I've never gotten personal treatment in my healthcare. I think I had one moment when I had a doctor who really took her time. I think it was like the sweet spot when doctors were getting more money. And I remember it very barely, but I'm like, you are lucky that you've gotten this individualized treatment because it was a small window for you and now it's going away. And so sometimes, you start to see from that perspective. I'm Gen X. I didn't get anything. We're always left out and we're going to be left out again. I'm used to it. I don't like to have to be in this scarcity mindset because that's exactly what it is. Survival of the fittest. I don't like that. I grew up very, very poor. It's all relative. I grew up with enough. I most often had enough to eat, but I did grow up where I had to struggle and to get out of that environment to make my own way. So I understand it to a certain extent, but we're asked to man up and to make people hungry. So there is this feeling of urgency out there to get people to rely on themselves. So we've got to have only the best survivalists. It's a time to bring back the strong, the tough men. They will lord us on high and tell us whether we are hired or fired. That's exactly what's going to happen. You got to bring your sleeping bags back into work. No more entertainment, no more relaxing by the beach. It's time for survival of the fittest. The elite is thinking about all of these things that they want to conquer, all the power they want to wield, this fantasy world. And no one is thinking about the practicalities of having to live in a world that is on fire. Like nobody's thinking about this. As long as it doesn't bother them, it's okay. The threat of a nuclear holocaust, or how the majority of us are going to be able to survive without access to the resources. What is going to happen to those people? It's not like they're going to be able to go anywhere except on the streets. I mean, are we going to create big, massive systems of prisons for homeless people? Are we going to be half homeless in prisons? It feels like we're going into this Lord of the Flies time period, really. To be honest, that's the energy that I'm starting to feel. And I know a lot of people are starting to feel that, like the world isn't safe and they need to figure out how to make themselves safe. It's going to be kind of selfish, I got to make sure I'm safe and my family's safe. You figure it out on your own. But in that world, it becomes very dangerous to live, especially for the people that have, because there's going to be a lot of people that don't have. And so there's going to be a lot of danger in that a contract, because there's going to be people that are pissed. I don't want to put a lot of fear into the world, but that's the reality of where we're headed, into this new cycle where we're really going to have to rely on ourselves. We can no longer rely on the system to help us. And that's what the reality show is presenting to us. And unless we collectively organize toward something that we can control a little bit, we're headed toward that direction. We're going to have to really fight for it. So we've got all of these technocrats now. The surprise element that helped win this election was the technocrats, the technologists who saw an opportunity to wield power toward the direction they want to go toward, was to partner with Trump, to partner with a dictator. They're experimenting with this tough guy persona because they feel like the country should be run by the CEO guy that they control. But it's interesting. I think they're going to be woken up to some extent in this time period. They're going to see the reality of what that means very soon, that it's not going to always be within their control. I think they're experimenting with this. They want to wield more power. They're shaking hands with the devil, basically. That's what they're doing. They're shaking hands with the devil. They were born with silver spoons in their hands. They were born in pretty wealthy families, most of these technocrats, and they were nerdy when they were younger, and they had a lot of imaginations about being alpha male and taking control, but they're not heroes. They want to be anti-heroes. They all want to be gods, and they think they're gods in some senses. They're yielding all of this money and power because they think that they have better ideas about where to spend our money and to maintain dominance. And they've started to feel restrictions. They've grown so far and we're stagnating, and they're looking for that next stage of growth that will push them into even more and more power. So they have this naive idea about this dictator that should run the country. Will it be what they imagine? They be on top? What kind of leadership are they really hoping for that gets you killed if you don't pay the toll? It's playing with matches, I think. I don't think people really understand. I think we all have this fantasy idea of ruling the world. Not all of us. I don't want to rule the world, but I definitely want to have control over my environment and what I do. And I think a lot of us have that feeling of just needing a certain amount of control. But once you have a certain amount of money and power, it becomes much more risky bet to figure out how to gain that control and access. You start to live it in a kind of cartoonish way to the extreme. And that's what people are doing. They're living it out to the extreme and being very pompous about what they actually can wield at the end of the day. It's very dangerous. And one thing I want to talk about too is this toxic male energy that's become more and more apparent. Mark Zuckerberg was on Joe Rogan's show just recently in January, and he talked about how the corporate culture had become too feminine, suppressing its masculine energy and abandoning supposedly valuable traits such as aggression. Now, that's very, very Aries. He says that the workplace had been neutered. And to be honest, I don't think it had been neutered at all. I don't think women had much control in the workplace. We were trying to work toward some sort of respect and a place at the table. But women had been filing lawsuits about reprehensible sexism, especially in the tech world. So this cry for a return to male domination, I think, is a false flag. And they just don't want to be legally responsible for what they've been doing. They don't want to have to answer to these ethical guidelines that say you need to treat women with respect and not as simply sex objects that you can wield control over. And then all of these diversity programs, they don't want to be forced into. They think that everything is a meritocracy and they deserve to be where they're at, and they deserve to hire the people that are part of their network, which are white people. And so that's the bottom line. They don't want to be forced to do anything that they don't want to do. I don't want to be forced to do anything that I don't want to do either. I mean, so I have sympathy toward that, but a fair and equitable world starts with opening your network. Now, if you don't have the values to say, I think that we need diversity in the world, there are more people that are buying and participating in our products, then you're going to go toward that. But it has not shown out in history. We've had a lot of male domination, thinking that they know what's right for everybody. And so when you try to introduce these programs, there is a little bit of trying to manipulate it to happen, which people pretty much resist. So I understand that, because when you think about mirrors, I think there's this thing about this domination, like who's going to dominate who. And there's not a sense of collaboration that's very Libra. It's more, we're going toward the Aries. We want to dominate. And if we don't dominate, other people will. And if we don't use force, to get what is rightfully ours, another person will. And I think this is just a mirror of each other. We're blaming the other for doing certain things that make us feel controlled, but then we want to control those people to do what we want them to do. So it's not like you're not controlling the other, you're just switching sides. And Gurdjieff really talked about this a lot. It was called a buffer because we don't see that. We don't want to see that. We justify our behavior. So there's this liberalism that has been attacked, and I can see it very clearly, and I understand it. There's this forcing idea. You're an ableist. You're not inclusive. You're not considering that I'm neurodivergent. There's all of these things that people were having to consider. It's really just being an individual and having a right to be an individual. But people felt forced. They felt forced with pronouns. They felt forced with all of these things, and they felt like it was getting out of control. But now it's the other side. So I'm going to force my racism on you. I'm going to force my Christian values. I'm going to force family values. That's not going to work either. It's just an opposite reaction. So we're going around the wheel and we're just creating these polarizations and reactions and backlashes against this change. Eventually you come into some sort of balance. But in a time of extreme shifts and changes, that balance goes out the window. You're in an extreme area, and we're in an extreme area right now. We're in a very Uranus change, going into new cycles, very extreme. And that's the dangerous part, because these leaders can come and control us and become the dictator that we were all fearing. And then that's it. You take over a country, you become a dictator, and it's very hard to go back. Everybody's always saying, well, the United States, surely that's not going to happen. Well, I don't know. We're shaking things up. We're going into a new cycle for sure. And we're confronting our individuality versus our collective responsibilities. We're starting this reality show, experimenting with this great dictator. We've got Trump. He's the kingmaker. He's basically touting this idea, this fantastical idea that he should be the person that's in complete control. And he's setting the stage for this technocrat CEO type of position. I think in my imaginings of what's happening is that the technocrats are like, well, he's a stopgap, he's old, and we'll put him to prepare the landscape for eventual control with a real CEO that we're supporting. We've got the vice president, Vance. Peter Thiel controls Vance. And so we'll take a chance because Trump has this magnetic power, but will it play out where he's expecting it to play out? Like I mentioned at the early part of this presentation, we're the fool. So we're stepping out into new territory and we're just going to see what happens. And maybe something great will happen, maybe something magical will happen, or maybe we'll go into a real crisis period. There's a lot of indications that it's going to be pretty rocky, and it is going to be period of some crises. Now, Trump, if you understand his chart, his rising sign is right on Regulus, this very powerful star, which does prophesy kings. But in that prophecy, it's very clear that if you are not humble, you can have a great fall. And so what we're seeing with Trump's behavior and the ways that he's being so pompous and cruel in his social sharing of being this king who has gold statues in a place where people have died, their children have died, their husbands and their wives have died. There's been great destruction. And he's putting up AI pictures of him as this golden god, him and Netanyahu on the beach, and they're basking in their power. And that usually ends pretty badly for somebody. Now, will it end badly for him or will it end badly for us? But rubbing somebody's nose, innocent people's nose, into this idea that I'm going to decimate the place that you're from, and I'm going to put up casinos and places for rich people to dwell, it's inciting some pretty serious rage in people. Now, who started this war? You could argue Israel's just fighting back, but it's gone beyond that, I think. And to use that opportunity to push this idea that you're going to take over this piece of land and displace families and displace people who've gone through unimaginable terror, you're just breeding that hatred more and more into those people. And you're creating warriors. So I would be careful with all of this play acting that you're putting out. You think that you're putting yourself into a stronger position, but you're actually putting yourself into a weaker position. You're putting our country into a weaker position because force can only take us so far. But we are going into a time with Saturn and Aries, and that's all about force. But there will be a backlash for sure. So during this time period, yes, we will have warriors and we'll have people who have strong values that'll come to the forefront. When Neptune and Saturn meet in Aries, it's been described as David and Goliath. And I thought this was interesting because I saw this quote from Mark Elias. He was talking to Musk and he was talking back to Musk's very divisive speech around rights. And he says, "As you know, my English name is Mark, but my Hebrew name is Elhanan, after the great warrior in David's army who slew a powerful giant." So if you have the right values and your heart is pure, you're likely to win during this time because you're able to fight for what is right. People will rally behind you. You don't have to have all of this force or might because there's something deeper to that. And so heroes like that will come. Now, will they be able to make a difference? We don't know. But I also liked this quote from Alexander Vindman. He was a whistleblower the first time that Trump took office, and he has a book that's called The Folly of Realism. He talks about the unpredictability of Trump's leadership. And he says, that's what we're going to have to storm to a certain extent. A lot of unpredictability, a lot of chaos, a lot of public pronouncements that then get moderated in reality and execution. We've already seen this happen to some extent. We'll see that play out repeatedly. It happened in the first administration. It'll happen in the second one. I think our friends will find us less reliant, and they're going to have to go it alone to a certain extent. They're going to double down, let's say, for instance, on support of Ukraine, maybe even put troops on the ground in Ukraine. Now, we're starting to see that, and we're starting to see our allies wake up and realize that they can no longer rely on us. And that is going to have longer term impacts, because if we have no allies, when we are in trouble, nobody's going to come to our side. So this is going to impact us. We do control the currency, and people are starting to wake up and think that's not really a great idea. We need to figure out new allies. We need to figure out new partnerships. And I think that that's going to happen. And we're going to be in a place of vulnerability at that time, because what are we going to be allies with? Dictators? Well, I wonder how that's going to play out. Eventually, it's going to be, can we trust our partners or not? We're going into this new territory. We're going to take a leap of faith. Is it going to be the right choice? We won't know until we get there. But it's risky, very risky. And I think it's probably going to surprise us where we're going to end up. Before I talk about the eclipse charts, I want to point to a video I posted on my Heretic Sisters channel analyzing the human design charts of Trump and Elon Musk. I was really confused about their partnership until I looked at some of their electromagnetics. So if you're interested in watching that, I'll post a link below this video. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the eclipse charts today. I want to talk quickly about the total lunar eclipse next week because it's timely, but I'll be launching a deeper dive video on the solar eclipse since it's our last Aries eclipse for about 18 years. And it's also our last new moon at 9 degrees. In her book, Moon Phase Astrology, Raven Caldera calls this full moon the spinner's moon. These are some of the things she says about the spinner's moon. On the spinner's moon, we count up our web of obligations. Whom do we owe and who owes us? And how do we feel about those obligations? Who will be there to catch us when we fall? We also look at our attitudes towards service and whether we render it with a whole heart. It's a good time to render service to others, especially to small organizations that are keeping people alive and functioning in their lives, or ones that are concerned with helping people become more independent. Those born on the spinner's moon need to be a part of a working group in order to be happy. The apparently purposeless family is too vague. The cold atmosphere of a day-to-day job may not be intimate enough. They need an environment that combines useful work and friendly bonds, especially the bonds of mentor and student. Duty is not a cold and frightening idea to them. It is a comforting thought. They do have more ambition than many Virgo moons, and they like having influence over people. In less evolved cases, they may use it in a manipulative way, and learning to pull strings both effectively and ethically will be a major challenge for them. This full moon is related to the new moon that happened on August 14th, 2023. So think about that time period to see what the themes were, and you'll probably see some culmination of themes from that time. It's a predictive technique that we use in astrology to connect themes over time. And from a mundane perspective, this eclipse is extremely volatile. Like I mentioned in my previous videos, this chart is set in Washington, D.C. So you see Mars here still out of bounds, and it's intercepted in the 7th house of this chart, and it's in square aspect to the 4th house cusp. So we're already seeing the themes play out in the politics around us. There's preoccupations with security from our allies for good reasons. There may be more erratic outbursts because feelings of vulnerability can give way to defensiveness or territorial nature as people are fighting for their survival. There is an especially dangerous escalation possible with Israel and Hamas during this time. This is all risking our security at home. Now, the eclipse is happening on the 3rd house, 9th house axis, as you see. Venus is retrograde in Aries in the 3rd house, and Mercury is stationing retrograde the day after this lunar eclipse. Uranus is also an aspect to this eclipse. So we are already seeing all of the themes related to the trade wars that Trump has started with our allies. And we may see some volatility around these trade wars as we approach this eclipse. Surprise events may happen related to intelligence, severe weather events, transit-related accidents are all possible. And we could definitely see a larger governmental shutdown as the budget is due to be debated during this time, and we need to fund the government. So there's a lot of confrontations that are happening right now because Doge is basically stripping our governmental agencies, and our entitlements are at risk. Like I said at the top of this video, it's important to mind your physical and mental health during this time and to disconnect from the drama if needed. I'm the kind of person that needs to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. I have Saturn at the top of my chart, so I need to look at things realistically and pragmatically. That's the beauty of astrology. It helps us lean into the positive aspects of our nature and use our nature more constructively. So I've been pouring my energy into creative efforts so that I can hope to help others prepare for this time, like I'm helping myself prepare for this time. But also, I'm going to use the next couple of weeks to look around me and figure out ways that I can help others in my community, in my family. So where are the places that you can put your energy more constructively? Where are the aspects of your chart that you need to lean into to help yourself and to help others? I think that's what we can do realistically. We have very little control of what happens in the wider web of networks. But if we help ourselves and our community, that spreads out to others. And if more of us do that, hopefully that will create a wider effect eventually.